and welcome to Scribe Life. In this episode, we'll be starting on our first script. Now, the script that I've chosen for this is Uncial, and the reason for that is it's relatively simple to construct. It's only got a small number of basic stroke forms, I guess you could call them, and also it is an entirely uppercase hand, so you don't need to muck around with doing both an upper and lower case. So I started off with this little diagram, I guess you can call it, based on some guides that I got from a book called The Encyclopedia of World Calligraphy, if you want to look that up. If not, don't worry about it. But basically, the reason I've done this is I've organized each of the letters into what their key stroke styles are. So there's circular, curved and straight, and then diagonal. And I'll go through each set of these in the next couple of episodes, grouping these together because otherwise it would be awkward to just have random letters done in one episode. So let's get started. Before we start writing the letters, I thought I'd quickly explain how you measure out the lines, because that's very important. Basically, this measures what's called the X height, which is the height of the letter that you'll be writing. Because Uncial is all capitals, I guess, and has no lowercase, there won't be what we call an ascender or descender line, which is where you have J's and G's and K's, where the uprights go beyond this sort of area. But moving on, this is basically measured by a preset number of nib widths. So, for example, this is a 4mm nib, and Uncial is typically about 4 nib widths high in terms of X height. So 1, 2, 3, 4. You can use that to calculate the size of your letters based on your nib, or you can just measure them out and dial it in based on what feels comfortable for you. So to start off with, just double checking on my guide there, we're going to start with demonstrating the 2 keystrokes for circular letters, and those are sort of semicircular, starting from the top corner and moving to this other sort of side, keeping the pen at a roughly 45 to 30 degree angle. That's very important because that's how you get the shape of the letter, with that variation from thick to thin. And the same goes for the opposing side. And that was a little bit wobbly. It's difficult to do them in isolation because I'm used to doing the O shape, but I recommend trying a couple of these before you start writing your letters, just to familiarize yourself with the shapes. So once you've sort of got a handle on that, start trying to write the O letter. And the O letter is what all of the circular letters are based on. So that is a semicircle from the bottom and a semicircle from the top. And it should look roughly like there are 2 circles that are overlapping each other that have been filled in with the ink. So let's do that one more time, slightly bigger. So that's sort of what you'll be looking for. Okay, moving on. The next letter we'll be looking at is the C. And the C is very similar to the O, except instead of completing the stroke with another semicircle, you either mark out a horizontal stroke that you can pull slightly upwards, and that meets sort of with the end of the first semicircular stroke, Or alternatively, and I'm not sure how historically accurate this is, but give it a shot if you prefer the look, you can have a semicircular shape and then just a slight curve. So those are the two different forms of C. I recommend practicing those a few times so that you just get an idea of how they feel. The next letter is E. And E is very similar to C, except that you add a crossbar to the middle. So that's a semicircular shape, a horizontal shape, and then you sort of pull slightly up, across, and then up again to form the crossbar. So the only real difference between the C and the E is that little crossbar. Again, with E, if you like, you can, running low on ink there, you can have the downward facing stroke, or there's one last little version, which is, I'm not how sure of how historically accurate this is, but you know, if you want to experiment, something like that. So just give that a go if you like. And now, moving on to the next one, the G. G is even simpler than C and E, in my opinion, but that's neither here or there. But G is formed by doing the semicircular stroke. Again, I'm just not getting that. And then you have a horizontal stroke, and then a short stroke that sort of comes out as a 45-degree angle from the base of that semicircle and just curves down back towards the base of the X line. Now again, if you prefer, you can have the semicircle and then have the slightly downward curving line for the G, for the same reasons as the C and the E. So whichever feels right to you. I'm not sure which one's the more historically accurate. I can double check for you if you like, but for the purpose of this exercise, these are the two different forms that you can play around with. Now we'll move on to the D. Now the D is a little bit trickier than these two letters because of the extended line, and I'll show you what I mean here. You start with the same semicircular stroke, but then like with the line matching up with the top line for the C and the other letters, you start with this imaginary line sort of at the edge of the semicircle, 45-degree angle, and you pull that straight and then curve into the rest of the letter. And the curve starts sort of around just before the end of the first semicircle shape there. The reason for that is if you do it a little bit too early, you get this sort of droopy looking letter. What you want is that very nice sort of circular shape that's going on, and if you do it too late, it's not as bad. You may be able to get away with it if you're lucky, but it just gives your letter this weird sort of lean. So try and aim for that curved just before the end of the semicircle. Oh, it's a little bit too flat, but it's closer to the ideal than the other. Okay, moving on to the next letter, the T. Now the T is similar to the C. That's perfectly lined up here to show exactly what I mean. So again, starting with your semicircular shape. Now instead of having the crossbar that comes like the C from the end of the semicircle to the tip, you start just behind the back, sort of at the same point that you would for a D ascender, and then continue to the end. So that's, and this is one form of the T. There is a straight form of the T which I will show in a later episode, but this is one style of T that you might want to look at. So just to show you one more time, semicircular shape and then horizontal crossbar. Now the last letter is the X. Now the X I've saved for last because it's one of the trickiest letters to do, at least for these shapes, because it sort of involves opposing semicircular shapes, and I'll show you what I mean. You start with the semicircle this way, and then this short line similar to an upside down C, and then you move on to a second semicircle which has to intersect with the first one and then curve it over. And if you look at it, it's sort of like an upside down C and then another C that's sort of crossed over to the, so sort of a mirror image, I guess. And yeah, that's a very tricky one to do. I can't remember if there are other versions of it. In other episodes I'll double check for you. I think there might be a diagonal version of that letter, but if you like the look of that one, it's quite tricky, but it can be very striking. Just try that one more time. So semicircle, slight curved line, second semicircle, and then the other curved line. So that's the first set of letters for this episode. We'll be moving on to curved and straight letters in the next one, but in the meantime, just practice some of these, and I will see you in the next episode. So keep scribbling.